we doing it?
We are doing it. We are live.
Every time.
We're a little delayed from what we thought we would be, but we are live on Wednesday.
It's true. We're live on Wednesday.
Friggin' hump day, and all of it. So,
Cha-cha.
congrats on making it this far.
And to y'all.
Yeah. So, today, after our our very informal poll that we put up on Facebook last time in advance of this conversation, where we asked what topics you'd like to discuss, a few people suggested the Medicaid conversation would be helpful. So,
Here we are.
here we are. So, we frequently get asked by our clients or by adult children of older folks how they can make sure that Medicaid and long-term care don't totally absorb all of their savings and real estate and the family business and all that kind of stuff. So today's conversation isn't going to be so much about things like powers of attorney and revocable trusts as more advanced planning techniques, but specifically focused on keeping your savings or mom and dad's savings if there's a long-term care need.
Yeah. A good starting place for this conversation is to understand that long-term care is expensive. It's probably more expensive than you're thinking. So in Tulsa, average, nice enough place providing moderate care is going to be about $4,000 a month. If an individual requires memory care because they have a dementia diagnosis or they have Alzheimer's, something impacting their memory, those facilities are running about $8,000 a month, right? And they're nice, but we're not talking like the Hilton, right? It's just average, good place.
Yeah. So I think some of the most recent studies that have come out that are like statewide surveys. There was one published in 2018 that showed for the several years in a row that Oklahoma has the lowest average cost of long-term care of all 50 states, and it's still private pay facility is like in the low 60,000s a year. So, if you or a loved one has got a dementia diagnosis and is likely to spend 5 or 10 years in a long-term care facility, $60,000 a year churns through the assets very, very quickly. And if you've got a spouse or children that you're trying to provide for, that doesn't leave any margin or elbow room. There's no way to really protect what you've got in that scenario. You're just going to have to spend down. So it's expensive. Most of us are going to need it at some point. We're getting really good at keeping our bodies alive, but not so much keeping them healthy and functional. So most of us are going to spend the last part of our life receiving some kind of long-term acute care, and at this point probably memory care, which means it's not that you're going into long-term care or nursing home for a few months. It's likely to be a few years. So the expense is an important part of this conversation.
And I want to point that out because people sometimes say, I've done saving over the course of my lifetime, and I've got Social Security, and we get clients in, and that's true, and Alzheimer's runs in their family, or dementia runs in their family, and maybe they have $250,000 that they've saved. That's great, but when you're looking at long-term care costing that much, you really have to think even aggressive saving can still mean you need to think about long-term care possibilities and how you're going to fund that. So obviously the most straightforward way of taking care of these long-term care costs is self-pay. Okay? You might work with your financial advisor and come up with a plan that means that you are going to be able to self-pay throughout years of long-term care if that's necessary, and if it's not, then that whatever you had saved is going to be made available to your descendants, and that's awesome. Another thing that I'd love to talk about is something called long-term care insurance. Long-term care insurance is something that many people don't have, and when they go investigate it, the premiums are a little bit cost prohibitive. I still think it's worth it to know all your options. I'm that girl who likes to shop every single where, so that I can know, how much am I getting and for how much am I spending, right? I like the most bang for my buck every time. So I would really encourage you, if you know that Alzheimer's or dementia runs in your family, go talk to some places that have long-term care insurance and see if the premiums that they have to offer are something that feels like a good fit for you.
There's also, a decade or more ago, it wasn't too difficult to find a long-term care insurance policy that was perpetual. If you needed long-term care, it would pay for your long-term care until you passed away. Anymore, because long-term care is such a common experience, it's hard to find a long-term care insurance policy that will pay any more than 3 or 5 years at the most.
Or they'll have maximums per month or something like that.
Or per day even, yeah. So there are some insurance companies that are getting creative with how they can build long-term care benefits into their plan. I, for instance, have got a term life insurance policy that I'm able to convert a portion of into whole life, which in and of itself is not always the best financial planning tool in isolation. But what's unique about this particular product is that pardon the doorbell, the mailman just dropped something off.
Hey, UPS.
Yeah, welcome. So the death benefit portion of this whole life policy can actually be converted into a long-term care benefit if I need it. So I've got my life insurance, but if I go into a long-term care facility, this could pay $4,000 a month until it runs out, which can be a huge help as well. So if you have term insurance, if you're younger, I'm in my early 40s now, if you're younger and you don't think to yourself, I'm not going to need long-term care anytime soon, but who knows down the road, starting to convert parts of your term to whole life for this accelerated benefit can be an option to explore.
And that can be appealing to people because they think, well, I don't know for certain that I'm going to need long-term care. I don't know how long I'm going to need long-term care for. The premium price tag for that standalone long-term care insurance policy is kind of pricey. So they like this whole life with a long-term care rider option because it kind of gives them, maybe a little bit of the best of both worlds. They're paying for an eventual death benefit possibly, but also it's going to cover long-term care costs if they need it. So.
And if you don't need the long-term care, you can still get the death benefit. If you do need long-term care, that death benefit can help defray the cost. So it's a good tool. Now, we don't sell insurance, so we're not here to talk about insurance products, but self-pay and long-term care insurance are two ways to cover the cost of this. Now, the problem, of course, is if you don't have a long-term...
Before he starts talking about that, I want to just really quickly say, because I don't want you looking over hill and dale, hither and yon, for whole life policies with a long-term care rider. I know that Northwestern Mutual and New York Life have those kinds of products if you're interested in looking them up. There may be other companies that also have that, but I at least want you to have a starting point if we're saying this. So
yeah, if you're interested in getting introduced to some brokers that sell those types of policies, contact us and let us know, and we'll put you in contact with them. Yeah. We don't get any fees for that. It's information and relationships we like to connect people to. So if self-pay is not an option, either because you don't have much or because you don't want to lose what you have, and long-term care insurance isn't an option because you don't have the policy, then the only way you're going to be able to pay for long-term care is by qualifying for Medicaid. That's not as easy to qualify for as it sounds like, though. A lot of people just think to themselves, if I go into long-term care, I'll apply for Medicaid, I'll get the benefit. It's pretty straightforward. If you've had any experience with a loved one going into a long-term care facility, you know it's not quite that easy. What I want to do first is describe a little bit about how you actually have to qualify without planning, and then discuss an option that we use as an estate planning tool to help our clients and their families qualify for these benefits. So, go ahead.
I just was going to say, usually, pardon me, clients are coming to us in one of two places, right? Either they're in kind of a crisis situation, and they're like, oh my gosh, we need to get mom, we need to get dad into a long-term care facility right now. So some of what we say is going to kind of apply to that situation. Or they're coming to us saying, hey, I know that Alzheimer's or dementia runs in my family. I have concerns about long-term care costs just based on family history. And then that brings up a different option that may be possible. There was something else I was going to say that was so important. Oh no, it was critically important.
It'll pop into your head. So if you've done no planning or you're in a crisis mode, we don't have the future to look forward to plan ahead. We gotta qualify now. Then there's two different kinds of financial tests you have to meet in order to qualify for Medicaid. There's what's called an asset test, and then there's an income test. So assets and income are treated differently by Medicaid, and you've got to pass both tests to get Medicaid. It's like going on a quest. So the asset test is different if you're married or single. If you're single, you can have $2,000 in assets. That's it, including the value of your house. Everything has to be spent down to your last $2,000 before you can qualify for Medicaid. So it's a very strict and harsh standard. You got to go broke. Okay. If you are married, there's a little more flexibility because the government doesn't want to force your spouse to become impoverished just to give you these benefits. If you're married, then there's a $3,000 asset limit, and your spouse, so long as they don't need long-term care as well, your spouse can keep half of your assets, up to about $128,000 in assets, plus your home, or up to about $595,000 in equity in your home.
So long as they're living in the home.
So long as they're living in it, right? If they're not living in the house, then the house is going to count against you and it has to be sold and liquidated. But if the spouse can live in the house, they can have half of your assets up to a maximum of $128,000. Okay? So there's a little more wiggle room if there's a spouse that's still at home. Now the income test is that if you here is the person that's needing the long-term care, you can have $2,300 in income a month. If you get more than that and you've done no planning, you don't qualify for Medicaid. There are things we can do if you plan to raise that income limit and pass that test, even if you've got more than $2,300 a month in income. But we'll see sometimes, if you're a retired teacher and you get a pension and then you get a Social Security check, it doesn't take much to get above that $2,300 mark. Now, again, if you're married, your spouse gets to keep what's called a minimum monthly needs allowance.
Yes,
MIMNA. They get to keep $3,200 in income. If they don't have that on their own, if you've got $2,000 and they've got $2,000, they can borrow $1,200 from you to get them up to $3,200 a month in ongoing income, and the rest has to go to the nursing home. But they get a minimum monthly needs allowance of $3,200. But you can't have more than $2,349 of yours. If you're single and you qualify for Medicaid, of that $2,300, you get to keep $75 a month as what's called a personal needs allowance. The rest of your check goes to the nursing home, and then Medicaid pays the difference.
Yeah. And I'm going to say that again because I think a lot of folks come in and they don't quite understand exactly how that works. So I feel like two voices saying it maybe will help. So the way that it works, when you're trying to use Medicaid to pay for a long-term care facility, you have your Social Security check, right? And it's $2,300 a month, right? So you're really close to that line from being disqualified for Medicaid. But you do get $2,300 a month. But the facility costs $4,500 a month, right? It's an average facility, okay? Well, you don't have enough to pay for that. So what happens is you apply for Medicaid, and then your Social Security check, except for $75, goes to yourself. You get to keep the $75. Everything else goes to the facility, and then Medicaid covers the difference between that $4,500 and $2,300 less $75. Okay.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So we've hinted at a little bit, but you've got basically two ways to qualify for Medicaid. You can go broke. You can spend through your savings, liquidate your property, sell your real estate, wind up your family business if you have one, sell the family farm, sell off all the equipment, and spend down to your last $2,000. That's the no planning route. Or you can plan ahead. So if you're like a lot of our clients who come to us at or near retirement, and they think to themselves, we've done a really good job of building up our nest egg, and we've got this ongoing family business interest that we get some money from, and we've got the lake house, or we've got some family land that we want to make sure stays protected if we need long-term care. Then that's a perfect time to plan ahead, knowing that 10 or 15 years down the road there may be a long-term care event. Or if you think your parents, right? If you're somebody that's in their late 50s or early 60s, and your parents are in their 70s or 80s, and you're thinking, gosh, they seem to be pretty healthy now, but they're at an age where this could happen any time that they're going to need long-term care, then we can probably get out ahead of that as well. But if you're at or near retirement, or if you already have a chronic illness, a lot of our clients come to us later in their career. They're not retired yet, but they've got a diagnosis of Parkinson's or an MS, or they know that ALS or Alzheimer's runs in the family. Then that's a good time to get ahead of this as well. If you plan ahead, then we can use a tool that we call a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust that's going to set those assets aside in a way that they're still yours in the ways that feel normal to you, but they're outside of the qualification process for Medicaid purposes. So that's what we want to talk about, is describing how that trust functions. So the other kind of side note here is to say that tax-deferred accounts, your traditional IRAs and your 401ks and those kinds of things, they get special treatment. So those still count against you or your spouse, but they don't go into this trust. There's a different way we deal with those that we're not going to go into the details of right now, but I put a note on this slide about how at the time that you need long-term care, your tax-deferred retirement plans can be converted into something called a DRA compliant annuity. And DRA just stands for the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005 that creates the possibility of creating this kind of annuity. But we can turn that asset that counts against you into a protected income stream and protect all or most of that money. So set in your mind, silo out tax-deferred accounts. We're just talking about your brokerage and your real estate and your savings and your land and that kind of thing. Okay. So how does a Medicaid asset protection work? A trust work? Well, first of all, what we do is we create the irrevocable trust, and not every irrevocable trust works for this purpose. So it's a very specific type of irrevocable trust that gets created and funded. So we create it in 2020, we move your assets to it in 2020, and then we wait. 5 years of your life goes by. That 5 years is important, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. But 5 years of your life goes by, and then if you need long-term care, you apply for Medicaid, and everything in that trust does not even show up on the application. It's not part of the assets that could count against you. You don't have to spend them down. They are protected. So you can meet the asset and income test without depleting the savings, the family business, the house, the family land, etc.
Yes. I have like several little caveat side notes, so whenever you're ready for those kinds of things.
Caveat away.
Okay. One of the things that I remembered some of what I was going to say before. Okay, so one of the things I was going to say is Medicaid is different from Medicare. If you were watching this and you're like, I have Medicare, I'm over 65.
That's awesome.
I agree with you. Medicaid is the different thing. Medicare will provide for 90 days of long-term care assistance. On that 91st day, you're out of luck. You're going to self-pay, you're going to find some other way, because Medicare says, we're done. We're done with you. Okay?
So Medicare is a benefit we all get.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what our assets are. If you're over 65 or if you're disabled, ta-da, you have Medicare. It's just an insurance benefit. There's no financial qualification for that.
We're talking about Medicaid, which is for long-term care. Oh, okay. Prairie's coming to say hi. The second thing that I was going to say, she doesn't have pants.
I know. Working with toddlers.
Yay. The second thing I was going to say, no, honey, mommy's doing no marketing, was that if you think that you may be needing long-term care or somebody in your family may be needing long-term care, I would encourage you to consider where you want that person to go, what you want that plan to be sooner than later. When people come to us and they're in a crisis moment, oftentimes they have put it off until they absolutely cannot anymore. And the reason that they cannot is because the needs of the individual have just exceeded what a layperson would be able to provide. And so when you're in a crisis moment, you don't have as many options, right? You're not going to be able to tour as many facilities and find the perfect blend of country farm and cost-effective living for yourself, right? You're just not going to have as much time. So if you think that's going to be necessary, even though it's uncomfortable, have that family meeting and talk about it sooner rather than later. And then there was something else that will come back to me at a different time.
Okay. So some people might say at this point, isn't this easier, instead of creating some kind of a trust to do this, why can't I just give my stuff to my kids? This is a pretty common thing. People will do a quitclaim deed of their real estate to their children, or they will go ahead and give their assets to their kids during their lifetime. This is a bad idea for a couple of reasons. First of all, it will work to help you get you qualified for Medicaid after 5 years, but you take two big risks in using this kind of planning. Number one is a risk to you. If you transfer title of your assets to your kids and they experience any kind of financial bad luck, they go through a divorce, they go bankrupt, they get sued, get into an at-fault car accident, whatever else, creditor issue, your assets are in their name. Legally speaking, that's not yours. It's theirs, and it's exposed to their financial bad luck. So if your kids experience any kind of financial bad luck, bye-bye to your assets. The second thing is a complication that you've created for your kids. And if you've transferred to them real estate, business interests, stocks, anything that has a sort of an appreciable interest, then you are creating a potential capital gains tax complication for them. If they inherit that from you at your death, if they get your real estate and your stocks when you pass away, they don't have that capital gains complication. They
Capital gains, Riley, what are you talking about? That
I know.
sounds weird.
I've been trying not to get into too much of the details. So here's the big picture is this. If you have an asset that appreciates in value, you bought a piece of property for $100,000 and then later it's worth $150,000. That $50,000 increase is called a capital gain, and in some circumstances, people are going to pay taxes on that. If your children inherit that from you later on, they're not going to owe taxes on that gain. They're going to get what's called a step-up in basis, and it's going to be as if they inherited something worth $150,000, not $100,000, and they owe no capital gains tax. But if you give it to them during your lifetime, and then later on they go to sell it, and they realize the gain, they're going to owe taxes at that point. The Medicaid Asset Protection Trust solves both of those problems. If you transfer your assets to this trust, and then when you die it transfers to your children, you've got it out of your name for Medicaid purposes, but you haven't created an asset protection problem for yourself or a capital gains problem for your kids. So we advise clients to strongly consider not just transferring assets to their kid's name, but holding it in this trust during their lifetime to avoid those two problems. So why would you do this at all? A lot of clients think to themselves, I've got the money, why don't I just spend it on my long-term care? And that's fine. We're not here to say that it's better necessarily to protect your assets. It's just what a lot of folks would rather do.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was going to say. That this is about creating a choice, right? We are not trying to say, hey, you definitely must qualify for Medicaid. This is about giving you the option to be able to qualify for Medicaid without being completely destitute and only $2,000 to your name. And then if you want anything special beyond that $50, right, like a new pair of shoes, you like that new pair of Nikes, you're not getting that new pair of Nikes unless your kids buy it from you, because Nikes they cost more than $50, right?
Thank you, Prairie.
So if you want to have the option of going ahead and qualifying, Julie came to try to help us. of being able to qualify for Medicaid and also having a little bit saved back, the value of the house, for example, then a Medicaid qualification trust is the way to do that. And you're going to have to do that 5 years at least before you think you need that.
Yeah. So you are not, if you use a Medicaid asset protection trust, you are not required to use Medicaid. You don't, it's not as if, kind of what Laurel said there, it's not like once you've created that trust, now you have to use Medicaid. If you still want to self-pay, go for it. But now you have the option to qualify. If you don't do this kind of planning, that option is taken from you. The only option you have is the spin down. So if you're somebody that thinks to yourself, I don't like control being taken away from me, I want to feel like I can still direct how this is going to work and be in control of how I pay for this benefit, then using this kind of planning is what gives you that kind of control. If you do this, and in my mind, and in Laurel's, this is not about some obligation to create an inheritance. You don't owe your kids or grandkids anything. This is not like saying, I just can't stand the idea of spending down my assets because then I can't leave my family anything. If you want to leave your family something, great, this is a good way to do it, but that's not the point of this. The point of this is a few things. Number one, you've been taxed for this benefit your whole working life anyway. Use it. The law allows you to. We're not running around the law. We're using what the law allows. Number two, you can preserve these assets for future generations if you want to, using this tool. And number three, and I think this is the most important one, if you need long-term care, Medicaid will pick up the bill for your monthly nursing home stay, and this trust can be used by your family, if they use it correctly, to help supplement your care. It's about giving you more resources for the rest of your life, not guaranteeing some inheritance for future generations. So I'm gonna let's see. Let me get out of that.
See if we can see questions.
Yeah. So we've had a few people. Derek's telling us not to touch our face. I'm touching it, Derek. I'm doing it. Thank you.
Does it count if it's your toddler touching your face?
Yeah, right. Thank you, Ryan.
She's doing it for me.
Robin says hi to Prairie. So we're coming up on about a half hour's worth of conversation. If there are any questions, I want to make sure we take them. Otherwise, Laurel, do you have any closing notes?
No. I interjected them
Okay.
and disrupted the flow of the conversation.
So disruptive. So I guess the last thing I would say is this kind of trust planning is not either or. It's not as if you have a revocable trust or you have an irrevocable trust. Most of our clients who are using this kind of planning have a revocable living trust that owns their checking account and their other assets that are part of their daily usage. And then the assets that they want to be protected in a long-term care event belong to this irrevocable trust. So clients that are using this tool usually have both, the revocable trust and the irrevocable trust. It's not one or the other. The other thing I guess I would say is, even though this conversation is focused on planning ahead, we do offer the help with clients who are in a crisis and trying to get qualified immediately. So if you're thinking to yourself, I've got a spouse or I've got a parent who needs long-term care right now, we don't have 5 years to plan ahead, that's okay. We can help create a strategy to get them qualified as quickly as possible. But we can't use this trust to do it. There's still going to have to be a spin down in that scenario.
I also want to talk just really quickly about this scenario that happens semi-regularly where an adult child comes to us and they say, hey, I have actually been helping my mom for the last year or so, last few months. Sorry, everybody. And I'm thinking about trying to help her get her affairs in order, and I think that we're, less than 5 years out from her probably needing to do long-term care. So maybe a Medicaid qualification trust isn't a great fit for her because we're within that 5-year window probably. Okay, so many adult children are taking care, I mean, they all are. They're taking care of their parent out of the goodness of their heart, out of love for their parent, out of all of the things that their parent has done for them over the course of their lifetime. And they would never ask for compensation, ever. And that is beautiful, and I celebrate you. And there's something called a caregiver agreement you should still consider. Okay? So that to say, if you are within that 5-year window of needing long-term care, there are some strategies that we can use that are going to help you take care of your parents in the way that you're wanting to for a little bit longer. So let's talk about those options.
Yeah.
Not right now, obviously, we've already talked forever, but...
Well, Robin asked the question, does long-term care take the place of the Medicaid trust? And the answer is no. They get used together really, really well. So sometimes clients are not in a position to do this kind of planning now. They've got a long-term care insurance policy that will pay for 5 years, maybe. What we like to do in that instance is say, okay, let's know that we're going to create this kind of trust when you need long-term care. And what's going to happen is you're going to go into the facility and your long-term care insurance policy is going to start to pay monthly for the next 5 years. That's the time to create this kind of trust, because as soon as the long-term care insurance policy is over, it stops paying, the protections of the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust kick in, and you can qualify for Medicaid at that point. So they can work together. The only time I would say, Robin, to your question, that a long-term care insurance policy does replace the Medicaid trust is if you have one of those old Cadillac policies that just pay perpetually.
Yeah,
if you come and
that's
say,
awesome.
Back in the 80s, I started paying a couple $100s a month for this long-term care insurance policy that's going to pay $10,000 a month until I die, then cool,
Fantastic.
You're covered. But that's very few people are in that kind of position. Okay, so this video is going to remain on the site. We also are going to have a blog post that has this information up today. That's got a copy of these slides as a part of it, and if we can, we'll link to this Facebook video as well to keep that all together. So if you need to go back and review this, great, or if you want to send it to your family to take a look at, to consider, it'll be up and available for that purpose.
Low key, have it start playing at Thanksgiving. Oh
Yeah.
no, what's that on?
Yeah.
Weird.
Cutting the turkey, talking about Medicaid, it's going to be perfect. Anyway,
right.
thanks everybody for
Thank you,
joining as
guys.
always, and we'll see you later. Stay safe.